To borrow a phrase you Americans like so much, this is not your daddy's biopic, is it?
It is not, nor your granddaddy's.
James Brown upset at somebody using his toilet. Why did you start the film off with such a bizarre scene?
Well, first of all, it's historically accurate. And secondly, unfortunately, which is why I was compelled to make this movie, as much as that man gave to the world of music, if you were to poll people and ask them who was James Brown, they always seem to gravitate towards the missteps in the latter part of his life, that being one of them. So I wanted to show that day and get it out of the way, but also to thrust us into a structure in which we would slowly learn who he was and why he was where he was that day. And that's what we decided to do. And that's much more interesting than starting with the birth of James Brown.
You adopt a non-linear approach in this film in terms of the structure. You also take the unusual step of breaking frame, which is a really bold thing to do. Did the success of The Help embolden you to take such risks that you would not have otherwise have taken?
I can't attribute that. I can't say it. I'll tell you what The Help did, what it did do. It wasn't the success of The Help. It was, my personality and who I am as a person. If you knew me, you would never think in a million years I would have directed The Help. I just was compelled to do so because it was so personally touched. I was so personally touched by the story because I lived it. So what that did do was, and was being my second film, I really wanted to show kind of how my brain really is, and that that I think in a nonlinear fashion, and that I'm bolder. But The Help was a certain movie that needed and deserved. It could only be told in a somewhat conventional way. And this is my response, or I might say, this is my strong desire to do something different from that. But in no way did it give me the courage. I'm just a go for it kind of guy. I just go for it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Breaking frame is such an unusual thing to do in mainstream film these days. Why did you adopt that device?
Well, I didn't, as you said, want to make my father's biopic, but one of the trappings of a biopic, and necessarily so, is the need to get out a lot of information about the person the biopic is about their successes, about how they broke ground, and what they did. And it's usually done through a reporter or swirling headlines of newspapers or a montage, and I just did not want to do that. And then it just hit me one day, like, who but James Brown would be so arrogant to come from the grave and infiltrate his own biopic and tell us exactly how it happened from his mouth. And that's where it came from. And I was able to have him brag about himself. And really, and it also pulls you into how he's really thinking. So that's why I did it.
The performance by Chadwick Boseman is superb. Hand on your heart, how much responsibility do you take for that?
Let's see here. The ultimate responsibility that I can take is, as a director, I early on learned that you're only as good as the people you decide to bring on and surround yourself with. And you're only as good as you will collaborate with those around you. You can't be a know-it-all, or you can't have an ego that means you want to take credit for everything. That being said, the credit I can take for Chadwick is choosing him. I knew that I needed someone that was from the southern part of the United States, and I knew I needed someone who was take away the showmanship and the dancing and the singing. To me, the most important item that an actor had to possess was being able to play a 63-year-old James Brown in the period that has been most parodied and made fun of. So And I went after Chadwick for that, and he came in front of me, and he read as a 63-year-old, and he transformed, and didn't even have prosthetic makeup. So I went after the best actor. As far as his singing and his dancing goes, Chadwick Boseman, I think, is the second hardest working man in show business. He had 2 months to learn how to dance, and we had an amazing choreographer, Acclaim Jones, and he raised the bar, and Chadwick met it. And a lot of people helped Chad with his dialect and his voice, and Chad got down the walk of James Brown by studying hours and hours of footage that I had provided him. But more importantly, as far as the dramatic scenes, Chad and I would meet every night. I would make dinner in Natchez, Mississippi, and he would come over, and we would talk, and we would rehearse, and just have an intellectual conversation about the work we were going to do the next day, and there would be a great amount of discovery. That's where it goes back to the idea of collaboration.
Just to be clear, Chadwick Boseman wasn't an actor who had a lifelong dream of playing James Brown, was he? The performance was pretty much built from scratch.
Yep. He, of course, being a Southerner from South Carolina, I am being from Mississippi, and James Brown is the South. We love him. He's our native son, so we were all fans. But no. In fact, Chad said, I'm not doing James Brown. Nobody should even try to do James Brown. It's impossible. And I was relentless, and then Chad agreed to read, and then he agreed to put on a wig and take a dance class for about a week, and we had an agreement that if at any point either one of us thought that we couldn't do that we could bow out, and that never happened.
Yeah, the performance is in fact so authentic that at times it's hard to understand what James Brown is actually saying. That was obviously an important part of his character that you wanted to maintain.
Well, it's mandatory. I mean, you cannot sanitize the way in which this man spoke. I mean, funny enough, I've never had a hard time understanding the real James Brown speaking because I'm from that part of the country. But I did realize that people in Australia and people in Europe might need a little bit of help. So Chad and I, he worked on a way. We had a system when I would say, I bet that's not going to be that understandable, but we would make it a little more so. But I was not going to at all take away the voice of James Brown, which is actually was legendary. He was hard to understand.
To your credit, you've imbued this film with the restless energy of James Brown. Was that calculated and choreographed and channeled? Or were there times where you stood back and said to yourself, I'm directing this film and even I don't know where all this is coming from?
Well, what was great is we had very little time to make this film, and we had very little resources. So it was sink or swim. So Chad and I and the rest of my producing team, we just all said, we're just going to go for it. We're going to fire this pistol. And I just directed on instinct. I had no other choice. So I didn't even have time to second guess. I just knew that it had to be energetic, and I had to direct it in such a way where I would have many ins and outs scenes, because I knew that when I got back and I edited them, they may end up in 1,000 different places until I settled where they were. So it was so exhilarating. It's so exhilarating when you make a movie like this that I think you get a little arrogant because you're having so much fun that you don't have time to let fear sink in. So you just go for it.
You made this film for $30 million, which is peanuts. When Brian Grazer tried to make it back in 2006, it was budgeted at $80 million. What does that tell us about the realities of making motion pictures these days?
Well, it's the reality of making studio pictures without robots, explosions, or heartthrobs. That's really where we are. It's easy to point a finger at a studio, but the consumption of entertainment is just changing every year. And also, as you probably experienced in Australia, people have an opportunity to consume the materials at home. So it's just making it tougher and tougher to get these movies made at the price you need, because, you know, there's just no guarantees anymore. So it's tough. and then you add the fact that I didn't have a big major movie star. I tend to not like to do that in my movies, and it's just more difficult. But yeah, I mean, it was very hard to get this made. I mean, Grazer had been at it for 12 years. I was crazy enough to think, well, I did the Help that cheaply in Mississippi. I'll go do it again, and they let me.
Did having Mick Jagger as an executive producer help in any way?
He will say this as well. You would think it would, that Mick would wave his magic wand and the banks of the studios would open up, but that doesn't really change anything. Business is business, and algorithms and models of business will never change. I wish Mr. Jagger had given me another $20 million of his own money, and he could have been an investor. He didn't want to do that.
The quality of the editing in some of the musical sequences, where you're cutting from one concert to another, is outstanding.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I knew about a month into filming is when I came up with the idea of having him go backwards and forwards with the same song, because I just wanted to show that James Brown had this music in him the whole time. He just often was before his time, and I wanted to show that he was just waiting to give it to us as we could handle it. And so then I basically, in all those locations, I had Chadwick in the wrong period costume perform a song that was from the 70s, and it just was it kind of worked out.